My son stood at his wedding reception and thanked everyone who made his special day possible. Everyone except the father, who'd just spent $85,000 to pay for it. He thanked the wedding planner, the florist, the photographer, even the DJ, but somehow forgot to mention the man who'd liquidated his retirement savings to make their dream wedding happen. 10 minutes later, when I handed him a copy of his inheritance in front of his wealthy in-laws, Jason learned that gratitude isn't optional when someone sacrifices everything for your happiness. If you've ever been forgotten by the very people you've sacrificed the most for, grab a tissue and settle in, because this story's about respect, recognition, and what happens when you take the people who love you for granted. I'm Bill Foster, and at 74 years old, I discovered that sometimes the most important lesson you can teach someone is delivered in front of an audience. You see, I'd been planning Jason's wedding for 8 months, ever since he and Chloe announced their engagement to her parents at their country club. The Whitmans were old money, the kind of people who measured success by the thread count of your table linens and the vintage of your champagne. They made it clear from the beginning that they expected this wedding to reflect their family's status. Problem was, Jason worked in marketing and barely made enough to cover his own rent, let alone fund a wedding that would impress millionaires. That's where dear old Dad came in, liquidating 20 years of careful retirement savings to make sure my only son could marry the woman he loved without embarrassing her family or starting their marriage in debt. I mortgaged my paid-off house, cashed in my 401k, and sold my late wife's jewelry to cover the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band, and everything else that goes into a wedding designed to impress people who judge you by your ability to throw money around. $85,000 later, Jason and Chloe had the fairy tale wedding they'd dreamed of. If you enjoy stories about ungrateful family members who learned the hard way that appreciation isn't optional, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. I've got 7 decades of experience with people who mistake unconditional love for unconditional stupidity, and trust me, the lesson I taught Jason that wedding night is one neither of us will ever forget. That reception hall full of witnesses was about to learn what happens when you forget to thank the person who made your entire celebration possible. Some lessons about gratitude are best learned in public, and some inheritances are best discussed in front of the people who assume you're getting them. Jason had been my world for 29 years, the son I'd raised alone after his mother died in a car accident when he was just 7 years old. I'd worked double shifts at my auto parts store to make sure he never felt like he was missing out on anything that other kids had. Baseball camps, college tuition, his first apartment, whatever Jason needed, Bill Foster found a way to provide it. When he brought Chloe home 2 years ago, I could see why he'd fallen for her. She was beautiful, charming, and had a way of making Jason feel like he was the most important person in the room when she focused her attention on him. But I also noticed how she'd look around my modest house like she was calculating its resale value, how she'd make little comments about upgrading Jason's lifestyle to match her expectations. The Whitmans were polite to me, but clearly saw me as an obstacle to their vision of their daughter's future. When they talked about wedding plans, they'd speak in numbers that made my head spin. $20,000 for flowers, $15,000 for photography, $30,000 for the venue. They weren't asking me to contribute. They were assuming Jason's family would somehow match their financial expectations. That's when Jason came to me with tears in his eyes, explaining that he wanted to give Chloe the wedding she deserved, but couldn't afford anything close to what her parents were planning. "Dad, I don't know what to do," he said. "I love her so much, but I can't compete with her family's money. What if she realizes she's marrying down? Marrying down. Like my son, with his college degree and steady job and kind heart, was somehow insufficient because he didn't have a trust fund. Like the boy I'd raised, to be honest, hard-working and compassionate, wasn't good enough for a family that measured worth in dollar signs. "Don't worry about the money, son," I told him. "We'll figure out how to give Chloe the wedding she wants. That's what family does. We take care of each other." Oh, I didn't mention that figuring it out would mean sacrificing my entire financial future, because seeing Jason happy was worth more to me than my own security. For the next 8 months, I quietly liquidated everything I'd built over 40 years of working and saving. The house that had been paid off for a decade suddenly had a mortgage again. The retirement accounts I'd been so proud of building disappeared into wedding vendors' bank accounts. Even Margaret's wedding ring and jewelry went to a pawn shop to help cover the final expenses. Jason knew I was helping with the costs, but I never told him the full extent of what I was giving up. I wanted him to enjoy his engagement without guilt, to start his marriage without the burden of knowing his father had sacrificed his entire future for one perfect day. I thought my sacrifice would be its own reward, watching him walk down the aisle knowing I'd made his dreams possible. Looking back now, I realize I'd been so focused on providing for Jason that I'd forgotten to teach him the importance of gratitude and recognition. I'd made my love and support so unconditional that he'd stopped seeing it as something special, something worth acknowledging. I was about to learn that some lessons can only be taught through consequences, and some consequences are best delivered in public. The first warning sign came during the rehearsal dinner, when Chloe's father stood up to give a toast, welcoming Jason to their family. He spoke eloquently about the importance of family values, the joy of seeing their daughter marry such a wonderful young man, and the bright future that lay ahead for the happy couple. What he didn't mention was where the money had come from to make this elaborate celebration possible. The Whitmans had paid for the rehearsal dinner and the wedding party gifts, but I'd covered everything else: the venue, the catering, the flowers, the music, the photography. $85,000 of my life savings had gone into making this weekend perfect, but somehow that wasn't worth mentioning in the toasts. Jason seemed oblivious to the omission, laughing and toasting with his new in-laws like they were the ones who'd made his dreams come true. When someone complimented the beautiful flowers, he thanked Chloe's mother for her impeccable taste in selecting them. When the band played his and Chloe's favorite song, he squeezed her father's shoulder and said, "Thank you for making tonight so special." I sat at my table, watching my son give credit for my sacrifices to people who'd contributed a fraction of what I had, and felt something cold settling in my chest. It wasn't anger exactly, more like the slow realization that Jason saw my financial support as expected, automatic, invisible, not something that deserved recognition or gratitude. The hurt deepened during the actual ceremony the next day. Jason and Chloe had written their own vows, and I listened as my son promised to love, honor, and cherish his bride, to provide for her and protect her and make her dreams come true. Beautiful words, full of emotion and sincerity, but somehow he'd managed to make those promises without acknowledging that his ability to start their marriage debt-free had come from his father's sacrifice. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour before the reception, I overheard Chloe talking to her bridesmaids about how blessed she was to have married into such a financially stable family. She was telling them how smart Jason was about money, how he'd managed to save enough for their dream wedding while still building a solid foundation for their future together. Save enough for their dream wedding. Jason hadn't saved a penny for this celebration. Every dollar had come from me, from the mortgage I'd taken on my house, and the retirement accounts I'd emptied, and the jewelry I'd sold. But somehow, Chloe had gotten the impression that her new husband was a financial wizard who'd accomplished all this through his own hard work and planning. That night at the reception, I watched Jason work the room like a politician, accepting congratulations on the beautiful celebration, the perfect venue, the incredible band. Everyone kept telling him what a wonderful job he'd done planning such an elegant event, and he accepted their praise with gracious smiles and humble thank yous. Not once did he mention that his father had made any of it possible. Not once did he redirect the credit or acknowledge the sacrifice that had funded their perfect day. As far as anyone at that reception knew, Jason Foster had pulled off a fairy tale wedding through his own resources and planning skills. I kept waiting for him to catch my eye across the room, to give me some small sign of acknowledgement or gratitude. But Jason was too busy being the gracious host, the perfect new husband, the young man who'd somehow managed to give his bride everything she'd dreamed of without anyone understanding where the money had actually come from. The moment that broke my heart happened during the reception toasts, when Jason stood up to thank everyone who had made their special day possible. He held Chloe's hand and looked out over the crowd of 200 guests with tears in his eyes, clearly moved by the magnitude of what had been accomplished for their wedding day. "Chloe and I want to thank everyone who helped make tonight so incredible," he began, his voice strong and clear. "First, we have to thank Bob and Linda Whitman, Chloe's parents, for their guidance, their wisdom, and their incredible generosity in helping us plan this celebration." The crowd applauded as the Whitmans smiled and raised their champagne glasses. They'd spent maybe $8,000 on the rehearsal dinner and some flowers, but Jason was thanking them for their generosity while I sat at my table having spent 10 times that amount. We also want to thank our incredible wedding planner, Sandra, who somehow managed to coordinate all of this chaos and make everything look effortless, Jason continued, gesturing toward the woman who'd charged me $15,000 to organize the vendors I was paying for. More applause. Sandra stood and took a little bow, beaming with pride at the recognition for her hard work. Work I'd paid her very well to perform, but somehow Jason was giving her credit as if she donated her services out of the goodness of her heart. And of course, we have to thank Marcus and his amazing band for providing the soundtrack to the most important night of our lives, Jason went on, raising his glass toward the bandstand where the 5-piece ensemble I'd hired for $8,000 was setting up for the next set. The band members waved, the crowd cheered, and Jason continued working his way through a list of people who deserved recognition for making the evening special. The photographer who'd charged me $6,000, the florist who'd cost me $12,000, the caterer who'd taken $20,000 of my retirement money to feed all these people who were now applauding Jason's graciousness. Each thank you felt like a knife in my chest, not because Jason was acknowledging these vendors' work, but because he was doing it in a way that completely erased my role in making any of it possible. He was thanking people for services I'd paid them to perform, giving them credit for contributions I'd funded. "Most importantly," Jason said, his voice getting emotional as he prepared to close his speech, "we want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for celebrating with us, for making this the most perfect day of our lives. Chloe and I are so blessed to be surrounded by so much love and support." And that was it. That was the end of his speech. He raised his glass, the crowd toasted, and everyone applauded as Jason kissed his bride and sat down to bask in the warm glow of recognition for hosting such a beautiful celebration. Not one word about his father, not one mention of the man who'd sacrificed his entire financial future to make this night possible. Not even a generic thank you to our families that might have included me by implication. As far as Jason's speech was concerned, I simply didn't exist. I sat there in my rented tuxedo, surrounded by 200 people who were congratulating my son on his generosity and planning skills, and realized that Jason had somehow convinced himself that this wedding had happened through his own efforts. He'd taken my invisible sacrifice and made it so invisible that he'd forgotten it existed at all. That's when I made my decision. If Jason wanted to pretend I didn't exist, if he could erase my contribution so completely that he forgot to mention it even once during his moment of gratitude, then maybe it was time to show him exactly what his future looked like, without his invisible father's support. For the rest of the reception, I sat at my assigned table and watched my son accept congratulations on the beautiful wedding he'd somehow managed to afford on a marketing manager's salary. Guests kept commenting on his financial responsibility, his planning skills, his ability to start married life on such solid footing. I didn't correct them. I didn't pull anyone aside to explain where the money had really come from. I just sat there, sipping champagne I'd paid for, eating dinner I'd funded, listening to music I'd hired, and thinking about how easily I'd been erased from my own son's gratitude. The worst part was watching Chloe's parents accept praise for their role in making the celebration so elegant. Other guests kept complimenting them on raising such a wonderful daughter, on welcoming Jason so graciously into their family, on their obvious generosity in helping the young couple start their lives together. Bob Whitman even made a point of finding me during the dinner service to shake my hand and say how proud I must be of Jason's success. "You raised a hell of a son, Bill," he said with genuine warmth. "The way he managed to put together a celebration like this at his age, with his resources, that takes real character and financial discipline." Financial discipline. Jason's ability to fund this wedding had nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with his father's willingness to sacrifice his own future. But I just smiled and nodded and thanked Bob for his kind words, because what was the point of explaining that his new son-in-law was taking credit for someone else's sacrifice? As the evening wore on, I found myself thinking about Margaret, my late wife, and how she would have handled this situation. She'd always been better with people than I was, better at reading between the lines and understanding what people really meant. I wondered if she would have seen this coming, if she would have known that making my support invisible would eventually make me invisible too. Around 10 o'clock, as the dancing was winding down and people were starting to say their goodbyes, I made my way to the coat check to retrieve something I'd brought with me just in case. Tucked inside my suit jacket pocket was a manila envelope containing a copy of my will. Not the original, but a certified copy that clearly showed how my estate would be distributed after my death. I'd brought it on impulse, thinking maybe I'd have a private conversation with Jason about his financial future, about the importance of planning and saving and building security for his family. But after sitting through his speech and watching him accept credit for my sacrifices, I realized this conversation needed to be more public than I'd originally planned. The final guests were gathered near the exit, saying their thank yous and exchanging contact information. When I approached Jason and Chloe, they were standing with the Whitmans and a few close friends, still glowing with the happiness of their perfect day. "Jason," I said quietly, pulling the envelope from my jacket pocket, "before everyone leaves, I wanted to give you something, a wedding gift of sorts." Chloe's eyes lit up, probably expecting another check or some kind of financial contribution to their honeymoon or new apartment. The Whitmans smiled politely, curious about what kind of gift the groom's father might present at the end of such an elaborate celebration. "What is it, Dad?" Jason asked, accepting the envelope with a smile that suggested he was expecting something pleasant, maybe sentimental. "It's a copy of your inheritance," I said, loud enough for everyone in our little circle to hear clearly. "I thought you should see it, since apparently I don't exist in your life anymore." The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. Jason opened the envelope with trembling hands, while everyone around us tried to process what I'd just said. Chloe looked confused. The Whitmans exchanged worried glances, and the few remaining guests nearby started paying attention to our little drama. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Jason asked, but his voice was already changing as he scanned the document I'd given him. His face went white as he read the will's distribution clause, the section that clearly stated my entire estate would be donated to various charities upon my death. "I'm talking about the speech you just gave," I said calmly, making sure everyone could hear me. "The one where you thanked everyone who made this celebration possible, everyone except the father, who spent $85,000 of his retirement savings to pay for it." Chloe gasped, Bob Whitman's mouth fell open. The guests who'd been eavesdropping started whispering among themselves, clearly shocked by what they were hearing. "You thanked the wedding planner I hired," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "You thanked the band I paid for, the photographer I funded, the caterer whose $20,000 bill I covered by mortgaging my paid-off house. You thanked everyone except the man who made it all possible." "Dad, I didn't mean—" Jason started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "You didn't mean to forget me, Jason. You didn't mean to take credit for financial planning you never did. You didn't mean to let your new in-laws think you paid for this wedding through your own hard work and savings." My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by months of watching my sacrifice go unrecognized. The Whitmans were staring at Jason like they were seeing him for the first time. Chloe looked like she might be sick. The handful of guests still within earshot were recording everything on their phones, because apparently even family meltdowns were content now. "That document shows exactly what your future looks like, without the father you apparently forgot exists," I said, gesturing toward the will Jason was still holding with shaking hands. $0. Every penny of my estate goes to charities that actually appreciate generosity when they receive it. "Ah, Bill," Bob Whitman said carefully, "surely this is just a misunderstanding. Jason never meant to imply—" "Mr. Whitman, your new son-in-law just stood in front of 200 people and took credit for a wedding he couldn't afford, funded by money he never earned, planned by vendors he never hired. He thanked everyone except the man who sacrificed his entire retirement to make this night possible. That's not a misunderstanding. That's ingratitude." Jason finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize that $85,000 was worth mentioning. You didn't realize that your father liquidating his entire future might deserve a thank you. Jason, I sold your mother's jewelry to pay for those flowers Chloe's wearing. I mortgaged the house where you grew up to pay for this reception hall. I cashed in 20 years of retirement savings to make sure you could marry the woman you love without starting in debt." Chloe started crying. The Whitmans looked absolutely stricken. Jason just stood there holding the will, finally understanding what his gratitude oversight had cost him. "But none of that was worth mentioning in your speech, was it? Because Dad's sacrifice is just expected, automatic, invisible. Well, congratulations, son. You got your perfect wedding, and now you know exactly what your perfect inheritance looks like too." I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at the small crowd that had witnessed our confrontation. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. And Jason, next time someone asks how you managed to afford such a beautiful celebration, you might want to mention that your father gave up his entire future to make it happen, assuming you can remember that by then. That was 3 years ago, and I've never regretted handing Jason that will in front of his in-laws and wedding guests." The video of our confrontation went viral on social media within days, shared by thousands of people who'd experienced similar ingratitude from their own adult children. I became an accidental spokesman for underappreciated parents everywhere. Jason tried calling me the next morning, then sent flowers, then showed up at my door with tears in his eyes and apologies I'd waited 30 years to hear. But some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and some bridges can't be rebuilt with sorry. I listened to his explanations. Stress, overwhelming gratitude, not wanting to embarrass me by mentioning money in public. But they all sounded like excuses for something that shouldn't need explaining. The inheritance stayed exactly as written in that will. Every dollar I'd managed to rebuild over the past 3 years is going to charities that send thank you letters when they receive donations, organizations that understand the value of acknowledgement and gratitude. Chloe filed for divorce 18 months after the wedding, once she realized there was no family money coming her way and Jason would have to build their financial future through his own work. The Whitmans, to their credit, were horrified when they learned the truth about who'd funded their daughter's fairy tale wedding. Bob actually called to apologize and offered to reimburse me for what I'd spent, but I declined. The money was gone, but the lesson was priceless. Jason's working 2 jobs now, trying to pay off the mortgage on a house he can barely afford, learning about financial responsibility the hard way. He sends me cards on holidays with heartfelt messages about appreciation and family, but they feel like homework assignments rather than genuine emotion. I've learned to be content with my smaller apartment, my modest lifestyle, and my clear conscience. Every month, I donate what I can afford to organizations that help elderly people who've been taken advantage of by family members. It's not much, but it's something, and they always send handwritten thank you notes that remind me what gratitude actually looks like. Most importantly, I sleep well at night, knowing I taught Jason a lesson about consequences that no amount of money could buy. Wedding speeches matter. Acknowledgement matters. Gratitude isn't optional when someone sacrifices everything for your happiness, and taking credit for someone else's sacrifice has a price that compounds over time. The viral video still gets shared occasionally, usually by parents dealing with ungrateful adult children. I get messages from people thanking me for standing up to entitled behavior, for showing that there are still consequences for taking family love for granted. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone who forgot to thank you? Have you ever watched someone else take credit for your generosity and support? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes we all need to know that demanding respect and recognition isn't selfish, it's necessary. And if this story inspired you to value the people who sacrifice for you or to stand up when your own sacrifices go unrecognized, hit that subscribe button. I've got 74 years of experience with people who mistake unconditional love for unconditional stupidity. Remember, folks, gratitude isn't optional, and some lessons are best learned in front of an audience that will never let you forget them.